afternoon, rainy afternoon rather. Here today we have with us Professor Debashish Banerji for the lecture. Topic is Contextualizing Indian Aesthetics, Revisiting Rasa-theory in the 21st Century. Professor Debashish Banerji, PhD, is the Haridas Choudhury Professor of Indian Philosophies and Cultures and the Doshi Professor of Asian Art at the California Institute of Integral Studies, San Francisco, USA. He has authored and edited several books on cultural history, critical post-humanism, Indian psychology, and on several creative and art-related projects, and has written and produced a documentary film, Darshan, The Living Art of India, in 2018. His book, The Alternative Nation of Abanindranath Tagore, is considered a landmark theoretical intervention. His latest published monograph is Time Steps of the Cosmic Horse, the Contemplative Philosophy of the Great Forest, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. He is presently working on a monograph on a theoretical approach to Indian art, visual imagination of India, history, theory, method. At present, he is also working on a film on the right to interpret art and diversity in the Durga Puja of Kolkata. So let us welcome Professor Debashish Banerji. And before we start, I would like to invite Professor Meenakshi Sengupta and Professor Santosh to please felicitate sir. Thank you. So, sir, it's all yours. Yes, yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Sengupta. It's really a pleasure to come here. I came here a few years back to your other campus. And so to be at this campus and particularly invited by Dr. Sengupta, volume-ta ঠিকই ছিল. So Professor Sengupta gave me this topic, Contextualizing Indian Aesthetics, Revisiting Rasa-theory in the 21st Century. And originally, I did not think about this topic myself. But once he gave it, I thought it's such a apposite topic in our time. Mainly because people who are studying Indian art today tend to fall into two camps. Either they're studying ancient Indian art, classical art, or medieval art, or they're studying modern art. And this reality has practical implications as far as museums are concerned, for example. You have some museums, when they have departments of Indian art, they just have these statues, etc., that go back to the 4th century, 10th century, maximum 15th, 16th century. They have miniature paintings, and they stop. And there are some that are focused on modern Indian art, etc., and they have nobody with any expertise in the past. And these two realities don't talk to each other. They've become like watertight containers. So to talk about Rasa theory, which according to many is the heart of the Indian knowledge system of Indian art, in our times is a very inviting topic. It's really something worth thinking about. So, as Professor Sengupta said, and as he knows, my entry into Indian art is through studying Abanindranath Thakur. And the fact that the Bengal school, in a way, stands at that cusp between the ancient and the modern. To some extent, people like Abanindranath, like Havel, like Kumaraswamy, etc., were trying to negotiate this dialogue. It went to some extent, and then it broke down, I'd say. So today we are reconsidering this dialogue. So, of course, to talk about Rasa, we have to go back to the originary moment. And some may say, why? Because to talk about Rasa in the context of the Taittiriya Upanishad is not necessarily related to art. But actually it is. It is because you will find that references to this beginning are made continuously, repeatedly, even by the theoreticians who come afterwards. So it's important for us to look at this beginning because even when we talk about anything that has a history, we find that its meanings keep changing. So what is the beginning? Also, because this talk that I'm giving, I'm going to approach the issue or the subject of rasa through the lens of historiography, particularly because we are looking at it from the 21st century. Not only what does it mean to us today, but what has it meant to us over time? Not one thing, but many things. And also through the perspective of comparative aesthetics, which I'll bring in later. So first, looking at it historiographically, I'd like to locate a few points of time, when the understanding of rasa has shifted. So we start with the original moment in 6th century BCE, in the Taittiriya Upanishad, where classifying the historical context, we can call it ancient India. You see, so I've classified it conveniently into 4 slabs: ancient India, classical India, medieval India, and modern India. These are the 4 slabs. Today we can talk about a postmodern India. But a postmodern or a post-colonial India is still a India that is 1 foot in the modern, right? So that's why we are using the term modern over here. So the historical context for Taittiriya Upanishad understanding of rasa is ancient India. What is the sociological context? This is very important because our understanding of art arises out of a social context. The social context, I don't want to go deep into it because I have actually studied this particular area. What was happening in the Upanishads is that there was a countercultural movement going on. Today we think of Upanishads as seamlessly a part of Veda, but they weren't. They were actually reacting against the Veda. So these texts are countercultural texts, and they're texts of contemplative philosophy. So they're asking you to contemplate, to think about what is it that is the meaning of this thing. So because it's so old and we don't have the time, I'm not going to go into depth, but if we have time later, we can unpack some of this. So there is the Sanskrit. I will read the English translation, which is my translation. The non-existent alone was here in the beginning. From that, the existent was born. Itself created itself. Therefore, it is called the beautifully made. Indeed, it is beautifully made. Sukritam is the word there. Now, you can translate it in a number of ways. Sukritam can mean well-made, made properly, or beautifully made. I'm just using the term beautifully made because our consideration is through aesthetics. It is truly rasa, raso vaisa, that is the famous line that occurs over here. Raso vaisa, it is truly rasa. And what is rasa? So rasa has a number of meanings. There itself we have an entire plurality of understanding of rasa. So I have put 3 meanings there: essence, taste, and juice. There's one more meaning, salt. We'll come to that, from which rasayan has come, or the kitchen, rasoi. See? So these meanings are implicit. It is truly rasa. It is truly the essence. It is truly taste. It's tasty. And it is truly juice, something which is nourishing. Having obtained this rasa, one becomes full of bliss. Who indeed could inhale or exhale if the sky or space, the word used is akasha, if the sky or space was not full of bliss? It is this bliss alone that has gone forth. When a being attains establishment, there is also the following verse. So it goes into the next verse. This is the context for rasa. And we have occasion to think about this a little more towards the end. Hello. Okay. So we move on to the second moment in history, and that is the canonical moment for art. It's Bharata's Natya Shastra, which is considered to be anywhere in the range between 2nd century BC and 2nd century CE. This is a very fertile time in India, 2nd century BC to 2nd century CE. This is the time when what we today call Hinduism is being born. It is the invention of Hinduism that's going on. Again, we won't go into detail over there right now, but this is happening. A lot is going on at this time. The historical context is classical India. So we've moved from ancient India to classical India. This is classical India because courts are involved and courts are promoting a certain kind of thinking, writing, cultural production. The sociological context is urban, courtly, performative arts. So that's what the Natya Shastra is about. Natya Shastra is not about art, about painting, sculpture, or anything like that. It's really about theater. And then we, of course, have dance that comes later that is related to theater. But Natya Shastra is really about theater. So it's the urban performing arts. And who is addressed? That is the important part in thinking about each of these instances of rasa. Who is this text going out to? For Natya Shastra, it is what is called the Nagarika. The Nagarika is the urban, well-studied, educated person of the city. More properly, it is the person of the court, as we'll see when we look at it in greater detail. And the canonical little aphorism for rasa in the Natya Shastra, coming from chapter 6, is Vibhava Anubhava Vyabhichari Samyogat Rasa Nishpatti. Rasa is born or attained from the combination of Vibhava, Anubhava, and Vyabhichari bhavas. And what are these? These are the 3 kinds of constituents of rasa. Vibhava means determinants, and they refer to the contextual conditions that evoke emotion or mood. And contextual conditions means things like circumstances, setting, character. See, later, the whole idea of rasa is going to move from theater to text, to novels, poetry, things like that. And it's easier to understand it from there that when you are reading about something, somebody sets up an environment. In that environment, there is a certain mood that is created. That is the vibhava. You also get to know what are the characteristics of the persons involved. So you expect something from the vibhava. The anubhava are the consequence. They involve the physical and physiological manifestations of emotion or mood. And they are related to things like mudra, bhanga, asana, and abhinaya. That is, what are the physical gestures, postures, movements of the face that are being expressed? So that is going to give a indication of the specific reaction of the person. And Vyabhichari bhava is the transitory or fleeting states. And Bharata refers to 33 subsidiary emotions that come and go, augmenting the primary emotion, such as joy, shame, jealousy, or fear. Now, one thing to realize about the classical period, the classical period is extremely interested in making classifications. See? So whatever we are going to look at, when we look at all these texts, in whatever subject in Indian culture, you'll see all these tremendous, enumerated sets of things. There are 33 of these, there are 8 of these, there are 9 of these, etc. And today we get stuck with that. We say, oh, there are 9 rasas, or actually 8 rasas. The 9th comes later. And we keep talking about those 8 rasas. But it's important to realize that this is a historical artifact. It arises at a certain time, and it has its sociological conditions. People are addressing somebody, and they expect that person to be of a certain kind, and these conditions we are talking about, these classifications, are related to that. So these are, you all know, these are the famous 8 original rasas and bhavas. A sthayi bhava is a permanent state of being, something stable, a state of being. And a rasa is an aesthetic mood. From the point of view of theater, the person who is acting has a bhava. That person has a certain state of existence. And the acting goes out in a certain way and produces a rasa. And that rasa also duplicates a bhava. So bhava is being communicated through rasa. See? So as you know, if you look at the rasa, so rati is love or pleasure, shringara is the rasa, hasa is hasya is the rasa, shoka, karuna is the rasa, krodha, raudra is the rasa, utsaha, vira is the rasa, bhaya, bhayanaka is the rasa, jugupsa, bibhatsa is the rasa, and vishmaya, adbhuta is the rasa. So these are the 8 rasas and bhavas of Bharata. Now, these are not all on a equal playing field. There are some primary rasas and there are some secondary rasas. There are 4 primary rasas. Shringara, or the erotic rasa, is a primary rasa. Vira, or the heroic, is a primary rasa. Raudra, or something which is quite fierce, ferocious, is a primary rasa. And bhayanaka is a primary rasa. Okay? The 4 secondary rasas are related to the primary ones. They are hasya, adbhuta, karuna, and vibhatsa. Okay? And there are attributes given to them which are colors, there are deities connected with them, there are activities and anatomical signs. So you can recognize it by these anatomical features, etc. It creates a lexicon. It creates an entire system. So you can recognize. And as we were talking about people who are trained, when you're trained in that lexicon, you recognize it. We'll see that that becomes an important aspect of all this as we move on. So, I'm not going to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all these colors and deities and all. You can see them. I'll put it up briefly. You can see Shringara, Veera, Raudra, Bhayanaka, Hasya, Karuna, Adbhuta, and Vibhatsa. They all have their colors and their deities. Now, that is the Natya Shastra definition of rasa. So, I have a comment on the addressee. Who is being addressed? Who is it for, really? It is for a heroic courtier. It's really for kings and people like you can see the image of Samudragupta, for example, who knows how to play the veena, but also goes about conquering the world. See, that's why there's a predominance of these heroic and furious and fierce, aggressive. So it's really the virile, aristocratic male. That's what it's for. The feminine is present, but the feminine has minor and secondary agency. The feminine does not lack agency or representation, but exists in a male-centered world to give and take pleasure or comfort to and from males and their activities. That's the setup of the classical rasas. Now, the next chapter is also classical a little later in the heyday of what has just been established as early Hinduism. This is the court of the Guptas. This text is the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana. And chapter 3 is a very famous text. People read it again and again. Chitra Sutra of the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana belongs to the 5th to 7th century CE. The historical context is classical India, just as in the previous case. The sociological context is urban painting. See? So this urban painting, we know from this other texts that there was urban painting. Aristocrats, courtiers, they learned painting as a hobby or pastime. They painted, they even had galleries at that time. They were called Chitrashala. So in galleries, they had exhibitions and things like that. Homes had paintings, or they had wall murals and things like that. Now also, you had schools of painting that were arising, very important, these workshops of painters. And some of these texts are moving there. They are not illiterate people. They are actually several of them, the leaders of these schools, they are inhabiting the courtly realm. So they are taking these lessons, but they're addressing the courtier. That's the person who is being addressed. In the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, there is a little bit more of a democratic movement. And the sociological context is still urban painting, but it is both religious and secular. In Bharata's case, we don't know whether there is anything religious at all. It's just these aristocratic plays. Here, in the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, there is a bringing of the whole thing into this new thing called Hinduism that has just been created, actually. So the addressee is the Nagarika, braided with the Darshanika. So because these new ideas of spirituality and religion are afloat at this time. So this text translates rasa to the visual arts. So this is the first time we are really seeing that what Bharata has produced is being applied to painting. Chitra Sutra is about painting, particularly about painting. This is not yet about the sculpture. It's soon going to be about sculpture as well. But because already when we are talking about the 5th century, the beginnings of the canon of classical sculpture are appearing. So how is that connected with rasa? Is it at all connected with rasa? This is a question. at this point. Chitra Sutra is not really about that, but it does enter that sphere. It enters that sphere in two ways. One is by dint of the fact that the sculptures in the temple, etc., are derived from stories, from texts. So in that sense, that they are dramatic and they are featuring moments from dramatic texts. And the other reason that it features is that it forms a new kind of approach to the understanding of rasa, and we'll get to that in a moment. The aesthetics features of paintings are given also in the Chitra Sutra. What are they? They are rekha, which is the line. Line becomes very important because we'll see later that the line is going to carry the rasa. The line is a fluid line, and rasa is liquid, is really a juice, it's a liquid. So how does the line move is going to be a sign of the rasa. So that's going to be an important feature of rasa, rekha. Pramana, which is proportion, vartana, which is modeling and lighting, but really modeling, which is the way in which the anatomical parts or the walls are going to bend and curve. Alamkara, which is ornamentation, varna, color, bhava, state of existence or affect, and rasa, aesthetic mood. So these are going to come into the world of painting. What is it applied to? It's applied to stories from the Puranas, Itihasas, and Jatakas. So now we see a new set of ideas or narratives different from the dramatical texts like Shakuntala and things like that, to which really Bharata's work applied. This is more related to something which belongs to the new sphere of religion, the new temples that are being born, etc. So this is a re-signification of rasas to a typalism of divine moods. So who is going to be the addressee is still the courtier, etc. But who is going to be the embodied example of rasa? It's the gods. So another text of that time, which becomes really important during the nationalist period, is the Jaimangala Tika by Yashodhara Pandita to the Kama Sutra. So Kama Sutra is also a very important text of this period, you see, of 4th to 6th century, because again, in the life of the courtier, erotics is really important. As you see, what are these people doing? They're going to war and they're making love. That's their life. Everything else is taken care of. This is the favored elite life of the Indian court. See? So from those texts, we are getting these ideas of rasa. So the Shadanga comes from there. Historical context is classical India. The sociological context is urban painting, secular. Just as I said, this is happening. Courtiers are painting. The Jaimangala Tika is related to that kind of painting. The addressee is the Nagarika, but also now, because of this new religious signification that is taking place, it is traveling towards a more democratic base, the Jana, see, of the Janapada. And we know what are the Shadanga. The Shadanga have been classified by a scholar, Victor Mayer, into 4 sets of 2. He's a very interesting scholar, Victor Mayer, because he has compared the Shadanga to the Chinese 6 canons of painting. You see, so, and he claims that there is a transmission, and that's what some of his work tries to establish. But there are 2 skills of differentiation, Rupa Bheda and Sadrishya. 2 skills of affective expression, bhava and lavanya yojanam. So this is the interesting thing where I said salt. Lavanya yojanam is lavana, is salt. So he's saying that is rasa. Lavanya, today we think of it as gracefulness, but lavanya really means taste, tastiness. And Mayer is equating that to rasa. That's one synonym for rasa. And it is centered in rekha karma, in the rhythmic line. So that's why we think about lavanya in terms of the way the line moves. Two technical skills, pramanani, proportion, and varnika bhanga, that is differentiations of color. Okay. Each of these became more distinctly coded so as to be teachable, leading to type. So this is the time when it really becomes a question of learning the code. See, that's why we have, when it is being revived in the nationalist period, Abanindranath is writing his, not only the Shadanga text, but also the text on notes on an Indian anatomy, which is really about, and he connects it to Sadrishya, which is what are the metaphors through which we depict various kinds of things. And it's very interesting, if you read that book, he starts off by saying that we are now going to study the past, but please don't get stuck here. This is not what it's about. It's about building a relationship with the past, not in becoming a person of the past. So, but this is what happens. It becomes a well-coded lesson that those who know the codes, they become the elite of that culture. See. These conventions also circulate among the folk, so that is the next level. It circulates among the folk and the jana, propagating the lexicons of rasa. At that level, at the level of the karkhana, of the workshops, there isn't so much the text, but there is more oral transmission that's going on. So you find a lot of these things are even today, or even yesterday in the work of Kalighat Pot, for example, on the work of Urisha Pot, or in Noya village, etc. A lot of these things are coming up, but they are either not coded in the same way, or they have, not the entire, they have their own understanding of it. So at this time, when we think about around this time, we have the translation of these rasas to types that are going to turn up in temples. Indian temples start really appearing from around the 6th century, from the 5th, 6th century, you see. And that, the big transition that's taking place from the rock-cut temple to the standalone temple. And that also is a very important transition because it will determine what can go up. If you have just a loose, amorphous piece of land where you're carving into rocks, you can carve large sculptures, small sculptures, but if you're going to make a standalone temple, it's architecturally decided where you can put your sculptures and how you can put them. See? So the design of the temple is going to determine how the rasas are going to be available to the temple. And so that's when you find this translation. We can see some of the examples of how a temple is going to show up all these rasas. This, for example, is Sringara rasa. This is the Veera, so Tripurantaka from Kailashnath temple. This is 8th century CE. This is actually not a standalone temple. This is the famous monolithic rock temple of Ellora. Oh no, sorry, this is Kanchipuram. This is a standalone temple. This is Brihadishwara temple, Lingodbhava. This is Raudra, the famous story of Shiva emerging from the linga and chopping off the head of Brahma. See, and you can see he's got that fierce look. He's Raudra, And it's a scale in aggression. You see, it starts from Veera, and then moves to Raudra, then moves to Bhayanaka. He's here, he's a Gajantaka, he's ripping the skin of the elephant and dancing his Tandava. So these are the main rasas. And then we come to the subsidiary rasas. And as Bharata says, we don't see that many examples of them, or they are muted examples. So hasya is very rare. Hasya comes up in some cases where, for example, in the Shiva, kind of environment, the pranks of the Ganas are considered to be expressions of hasya. But we have a really interesting hasya case in Mamallapuram. And that is this little Vishnet from the Descent of Ganga panel. See, what you're looking at over here is a fraud cat sannyasi trying to fool the mice. You see, he has his hands up like he's a yogi. See, just like the main figure in the Descent of Ganga panel has his hands up, he's in a yoga posture, calling the Ganga to come down. So here, this fellow is doing the same thing, and he has gathered a bunch of mice that have their hands together folded because they are meeting this great yogi. And when a number of them have gathered, he's going to pounce on them and finish them off. So this is an example of hasya. But as you see, it's not related in that grand sense. When we are talking about rasa as being, as we'll see later, rasa has to elevate the viewer to a level of universality. So this doesn't really elevate us to universality, nor is it speaking about some grand, divine action. There are examples like that. For example, around this time, Devi Mahatmyam is being written. And in Devi Mahatmyam, when Durga receives she emerges from the effulgence of the three gods and receives her weapons, the first thing she does, what is the first thing she does? Anybody? She roars. Pardon? She actually, she laughs. Yeah, she does her ottohasya. You see, she laughs. And her laughter is so powerful that the world shakes, and there's tidal waves, and everything is on the verge of breaking down. So that kind of laughter, that is a kind of laughter, a grand laughter, which never makes its, you never see Durga, so many Durga sculptures, you never see her laughing. You see? Adbhuta, so Adbhuta is related to Veera. So even here, when we saw the example of the Veera, you see that this is Tripurantaka. Shiva is destroying the three worlds that are created by the Asura. And you see over here somebody has his hands folded. So when Veera is being expressed, the flip side of it is Adbhuta. In other words, you are full of awe at this tremendous thing. The same thing happens over here in Adbhuta, in this Arjuna viewing the Krishna's Vishwarupa. He is in awe, and this is the Adbhuta experience. You see him over here. He has his head lowered and his hands folded. And Karuna, of course, then you have some examples of Karuna where the deity is bestowing grace or compassion. This is one from Gangaikonda Cholapuram, where Shiva is dressing the hair of his disciple Chandesha. It's a big story, I'm not going to go into it, but that is a sign of his grace. And Bibhatsa, there are 2 or 3 standard examples of Bibhatsa. One of them is Narasimha disemboweling Hiranyakashipu, and things like that. The other one is, of course, Duryodhana's death being killed by Bhima. So essentially, the idea of Bibhatsa is that some evil is being destroyed, and that is something extremely, in some sense, ugly, and evokes repulsion or revulsion. But the revulsion is related also to some greater good, or something like that. So that is how that particular rasa works. And then we find that by the 11th century, a new rasa has been added. And we'll see that Kashmir has got a very important role to play in how rasa theory is being interpreted. And that is the philosophers of Kashmir. So Kashmir philosophers introduced this ninth, many people say Abhinavagupta, but he inherited it. It has long before Abhinavagupta, Shanta Rasa has already been introduced by these philosophers of Kashmir. So, great example. The interesting thing is when Abhinavagupta discusses Shanta Rasa, can anybody tell me whose example he gives? I mean, one would think he would talk about Shiva because he's a great Shaivite. And this is a great example, Shiva Dakshinamurti, of the peaceful Shiva. But he gives the example of Buddha. He talks about the Buddha's head, the features of Buddha, and he says, this is really Shanta. So, but then he goes on to say that all rasas are ultimately based in Shanta. And he's talking about the fact that classical sculpture that has arisen is also depicting that. That whatever we've seen so far, behind the rasa is a calm, a kind of Shanta. Now, there is a complete change that takes place around the 17th century. See, and the notion of the 9 rasas, all those fierce rasas, etc., take a back seat. And now you have only Shringara that comes to the front. And you have that's going to become more distributed. Bharata already mentions something called the Ashtanayika, but there's no real talk about it, there's no real expression about it in the earlier texts. But from around this time, from 17th century, I mean, the writing, the books go back to about the 11th century or so. But from 17th century, we start seeing paintings that are going to arise that will talk about the Ashtanayika. And they are talking about it in some text complex. A number of texts are arising. So by the 17th century, 2 things. What is the historical context? Now we've moved to medieval India. Okay. What is the sociological context? It is still urban painting, but it is the braiding of the secular and the religious. So what is happening about the 17th century? There is a change in the courts that's taken place. It is a time when all the Islamic courts are in India. And these Hindu courts that are still there, they have stopped their business of war. Either they are defending themselves or they have made alliances with the Muslim courts. And what do? Then there's no longer all those aggressive rasas. They are spending their time in luxury. So there is a greater emphasis on the Shringara rasa. And so what we find is that the Shringara rasa is going to be talked about a lot. So this is one side of it. The other side of it is Vaishnavism makes a big rise at this time. And in Vaishnavism, again, this same Shringara rasa is going to be given this mystical value. So we find that, we'll come to that in a moment, we find that from both these ends, different kind of approach to the rasas is going to start developing. So in Bharata's Natya Shastra, we already have these Ashtanayika. They represent a specialized classification of the 2 modes of Shringara. Shringara has 2 modes, Vipralamba, which is separation, and Sambhoga, which is union. So these are the two sides of the spectrum. And as you see, those are the 8: Vasaka Sajja, Viroha Utkantita, Swadhina Bhartrika, Kalahantitarita, Khandita, Vipralabdha, Proshita Bhartrika, and Abhisarika. So these are the 8, and you can see the meanings. The Vasaka Sajja is the one dressed up for union. Viroha Utkantita is distressed by separation. Swadhina Bhartrika is the one who is really independent, has her husband in subjection. Kalahantarita has separated by quarreling. And Khandita is enraged with her lover and is much more broken off from the lover. Vipralabdha is one who has been deceived by her lover. Proshita Bhartrika is one with a sojourning husband. The husband is out of town. And Abhisarika is one who is going to meet her lover in the night. So we see that a number of texts arise at this time that are related to this. So, there's some erotic texts, just like, the Kama Sutra, there is Kalyana Malla's Ananga Ranga, that is 15th century. From that time, these Nayikas are going to become more popular. Bhanu Datta's Rasamanjari is from the 15th century. Keshavadasa's Rasika Priya, late 16th century. And Bihari's Satsai is from the 17th century. So we find that these courts, particularly in Rajput courts of Mewar and Bundi, or Pahari courts of Basholi, Kangra, Guler, and Gairwal, are painting the Ashtanayika from these texts. See? And they do that starting from about the 17th century. And these texts, and I've mentioned which text does what and which court does it. I won't go into detail. You can look at that. But that is what's happening. And then, interestingly, we find a lot of these Nayikas turn up in their own way in Kalighat paintings. And of course, we also are familiar with Avanindranath's example of Obhisharika, and in the Krishna Lila paintings, there are some of these Nayika situations. Just to run through some examples, the Vasaka Sajja from Nurpur, there are two very famous Nurpur manuscripts of this Vasaka Sajja, of Ashta Naika. This is the Viroha Utkantita from Bundi. And by this time, this is a 18th century series. They're just doing the Nayikas. It's not necessarily connected with a story text. The other thing to remember is, you'll see that in a moment, this is a Swadhin Bhartika, the Kalighat painting, very famous, shows the independence of the Nayika. And that's the thing about the fact that the Kalighat painters had imbibed some of these ideas, but were not coded. So they can be that experimental with it. Kalahantarita is from Kangra, 1800, 19th century. There's a quarrel. You can see the woman has got her back turned and the man is leaving. This is also the same Nurpur, but Rasa Manjari, but this is a second series. It looks very similar. This is from late 17th century to 18th century. It shows Khandita. The man is leaving. The woman is enraged, very angry. Vipralabdha, who is, throwing away her ornaments because she has been deceived. This is from 19th century. And this is Proshita Bhartrika. Her husband is away. So the interesting thing is that these Nayikas also enter what are called the Ragmala series of paintings. And actually, so when we talk about ragas in Indian classical music, A lot of them are related to these Naikas, yeah, the Naika themes. And so this is Ragini Dhanashri, and it's basically about a lover pining for her beloved who is away. And here she's drawing a painting of her beloved to remember him. And this, of course, is the famous Abhisarika by Abanindranath Tagore. Bhakti Rasa comes 16th century, and this is again medieval India. This enters into the popular field, urban and rural painting, and there's a braiding of the secular and the religious, Jana and Bhakta. And the text is Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, 1541 text, and he creates 5 primary rasas for bhakti, and they are related to gradations of bhakti. So as you see, Shanta is the lowest. So in a way, responding to Abhinavagupta, for whom it is the highest, they have made it the lowest, then Dasya, Shakhya, Vatsalya, and Madhura. And then each one of them, Madhura is the highest and is a spiritual specialization of Sringara Rasa. Again, you see how they converge. And each one of these rasas can include some of the 9 rasas of Bharata as fleeting rasas, you see. So that is how this works. And the texts that are mainly related to this are the Bhagavata Purana, and then even the texts that we've seen so far, they actually are painted as if it's Radha and Krishna who are the couple. So that's why there is a kind of a crossover between the Naika themes and the Bhakti themes. So who is the addressee, and what is a comment we can make about the addressee? There is a domination of Indian courts by foreign invaders at this time, and that has displaced the emphasis on heroism and aggression towards courtly luxury and enjoyment. Sringara dominates in the court and devotion among the subjects. So this is a sociological kind of split, yeah. So now, coming to the aesthetics. And again, this part is, I'm going to present this in a very concise manner, but if somebody wants to do more work, a lot of work can be done along these lines. So there are lots of aestheticians who've talked about the rasas, about Natya Shastra and rasas. I only mention, in contrast, one line of thinking which comes to us from Raja Bhoja, from the 11th century, Raja Bhoja of Malwa, who wrote prolifically. He held a secular view on Bharata's Natya Shastra. The book he wrote was called Sringara Prakasha. He held Sringara to be the highest rasa, and the enjoyment of rasas are evoked through universally shared worldly experiences and expressive structures. In other words, again, there is a coding that has taken place. So expressive structures means, you can see it even now if you look at the classical, the lyrics of classical music, for example. It's the same code that will repeat, you see. The metaphors, the kinds of things that are held to be beautiful, the lotus, the bumblebee, there are a standard set of metaphors. So what he's saying is that if you use language in a way that it evokes the kind of sentiments that are related to this learning, rasa will arise. You see? And that rasa is enjoyment. It's an enjoyment of Sringara, and it's Lokika. It is for the people. At the level of, it's worldly, in the sense, Lokika and worldly. Now, the other branch that is discussing this in a very sort of pronounced manner are the Kashmiri philosophers. And a number of Kashmiri philosophers, we actually don't have their texts. We know about them through Abhinavagupta, who's referring to a lot of them. So the first one is Bhatta Lolata, and his theory is called Utpattivada, production, and he belongs to the philosophical school of Mimamsa. So he says that rasa is caused due to the production from character through actor to viewer. So it's being produced. Character is the person who is the archetype is the one who has the rasa. And the actor is going to try to emulate it. So it's an imitation, a mimesis theory. And then the actor's acting is going to be imitated in a sense, in the receiver or viewer. And then we have Sri Shaunaka, and his theory is called Anumitivada, inference. So here it is a more cognitive kind of theory. He's saying that it's in a way it's related to Raja Bhoja. If we are given all these characteristics, then our mind will say that therefore we can infer that this emotion is being depicted, and our heart will then feel it. And then we have Bhattanayaka, who's from the 10th century, and his theory is called Bhuktivada. And here we begin to have the kind of the basic features of Abhinavagupta's theory. So Bhuktivada is saying, each one of these people are related to some of the darshanas. Like Bhatta Lolata is to Mimamsa, Sri Shaunaka to Nyaya, and Bhattanayaka is synthesizing Sankhya and Vedanta. In his work is called Hridaya Darpana, to produce a theory of universalized experience of rasa. So he coined the term, very important term in rasa theory. It's called sadharanikarana. Sadharanikarana means simplification or universalization. The work of art universalizes characters and emotions. And he's putting it on the work of art, that if you're effective in writing a story or in acting a play or in presenting, these people, however, are not talking about painting. They don't belong to the world of fine arts. They're all talking about writing poems and plays and things like that. But, so eventually I will ask the question, how important has this been to art at all? Is it really something that the people of the nationalist period created? See? So I'm not saying it's entirely unimportant, but we find very few traces, actually. Most of the traces are for theater, for dance, for poetry, and for writing. So we see that he's saying that if the writing or if the acting is such that the particularity of who is acting, like he gives an example of Rama, for example, or Krishna, who is doing something. When that person is doing what he's doing, that he is Krishna or Rama should go to the background. And what is being done should come to the foreground to the extent that it becomes an independent, universal experience. That universalization is what the viewer experiences, and by experiencing that, because he's related to Sankhya, he's saying the Tamo Guna and the Rajo Guna will become subdued, Sattva Guna will come to the surface and will reflect the universal emotion in the consciousness of the viewer, and the viewer will feel universal experience. See? So he's saying the viewer will become, and then due to that, the viewer will become of one heart, Sahridaya. Sahridaya, with the universal emotion, Sadharani Karana. However, that becoming of one heart in Sankhya is a dualistic theory. In other words, it's also like mimesis. You are never fully one. You are your own subjective approximate to what is being experienced. So Abhinavagupta is the fourth Kashmiri philosopher who's drawing on all these, and he belongs to another school. He belongs to a school called Pratyabhigya. Pratyabhigya school, Pratyabhigya means recognition. And what they're saying is that it's a non-dual school. In other words, they're saying, and we go back to that Upanishad that I talked about, that there is one being that is producing this world out of himself. From itself, it creates itself. And that creation is hidden. So if you're experiencing something, it is not only because it is being presented in a certain way, but because it is evoking a memory in you that will allow you to jump the bridge or jump the chasm between subject and object and experience the universal thing that is being talked about. See? So his theory is called Abhivyaktivada, and in his work, Abhinava Bharati, he discusses Bharata's Natya Shastra, analyzing his predecessor commentators and refuting them. His own position is very similar to Bhattanayaka, except for the agency he gives to the trained viewer. See? That is the Sahridaya. Becoming of one heart, Sahridaya, is contingent on being prepared through exposure to works of art. So, in a sense, he's also going back to the fact that you have to be ready for it. So, if you're ready for it, then you are ripe. What is coming will suggest some things, and you will take the suggestion and make the leap. See? So, universalization, sadharanikarana, is achieved through a process similar to Bhattanayaka's, except it is equally aided by the consciousness of the Sarit. Abhinavagupta also draws on the theory of aesthetic suggestion, dhvani, propounded by Anandavardhana in his work Dhvanya Loka. Dhvani, or suggestive resonance, works with the latent experiences of the Sahridaya to awaken rasa. Thus, rasa is not produced, but recognized. It's already inside us. We just recognize it. This recognition is of the nature of a shock. So that's why it's an aesthetic shock. What you look at when you really feel rasa is a jump. So that is what he calls chamatkara. This term chamatkara is also not his own coinage. It goes back to Utpaladeva, who is the founder of Pratyabhigya theory. And chamatkara lifts rasa experience from the worldly, laukika, to the spiritual, alaukika, and bridges the subject-object divide. Chamatkara is facilitated by the Adbhuta Rasa. So, Adbhuta Rasa becomes really important for him. Adbhuta here means something unusual, something which takes us beyond ourselves. You see? So, similarly, a privileged place is given by Abhinavagupta to Shanta Rasa as the substratum of all emotions and the foundation of Ananda from which recognition arises. A universalized emotion occurs at the interface of the personal and the impersonal, and hence puts one at peace, Shanta, even as one tastes varied, intense rasas. So now that's the basic substance of my talk. Now I'll go to a little analysis. First, comparative perspectives. So what does this, and just we are talking about historiography, but if we think about, does this relate to anything? You see, one of the reasons why this big jump or gap between the ancient and the modern exists in India today is because after colonialism, all this theory has disappeared. See? So, on the other hand, what happened is that, you know, the courts in the Pahari Hills, etc., when India was colonized, the British came into the courts and basically convinced the rulers that they were patronizing useless people. That what art was being called art was not art at all. It was people who had no skills. They didn't know what they were doing. So an entire new canon was privileged over whatever there was. And today, if people learn aesthetics in India, they learn people like Aristotle and Kant and Heidegger and people like that. So it's important for us to present a comparative picture to see whether there is any way that are these two completely different things from the perspective of the 21st century. We have to look at it in a comparative way. So one of the ideas there, the Platonic understanding of the spiritual realm, which is the realm of pure ideas. So Plato thought that in a similar way to some of like the recognition school, Plato thought that we all have come from the source of ideas. We have fallen from there. And after falling from there, we are trying to remember it. So Plato's entire theory of education is how do we remember our origin? See? So in that sense that Plato's theory of paideia, pedagogy, consists in awakening this memory. This bears comparison with the process of recognition discussed by Abhinavagupta. Second, in the critique of judgment, Kant's understanding of beauty relies on a state of disinterestedness in the viewer. So Kant is saying, if I'm thinking about my own interests in a particular subject, if I look at, kind of a goat walking across the stage and I'm thinking it'll be great to eat that goat, so then I can't experience any rasa. Of course, I will experience rasa. My mouth will salivate, but that's the only kind of rasa I'll experience. So he's saying that it's important for the viewer to train themselves in disinterestedness. Impersonality is the condition for the free play of the imagination and understanding, which can give the exhilarating pleasure of pure beauty. At the same time, this is an experience of peaceful harmony. See? So here you can see the relation between Sadharanikarana, Rasa Swadhana, and Shanta Rasa in Abhinavagupta bears comparison with Kantian experience of beauty. Kant's beauty, however, remains within the worldly or Lokika realm, because Kant, again, like in a way, some of the people before, he did not feel that we can actually cross the bridge between subject and object. But when we encounter, in the same theory of judgment, critique of judgment, he says, when we encounter something exceeding our ability to contain it, a touch of the infinite, we experience the awe of the sublime that takes us beyond beauty. This may be compared with Abhinavagupta's aesthetic rupture or chamatkara. In Kant, however, the free play of the imagination and understanding at first raises fear and pain in the inability of the imagination to contain or recognize what is viewed. It's interesting because here we can actually go back to the Taittiriya Upanishad, which is saying you will experience fear if you don't experience identity. See? So the fear is the first experience, but later an exhilaration as the human spirit recognizes its freedom. See? In Abhinavagupta, the infinite awakes the infinite. This is the recognition theory. And this is where it relates to the Upanishadic idea, leading to a peaceful, non-dual identity. It's a transformation that takes place. This chamatkara, you change in a way to become like the being that can experience a universal. You become universal in that sense. Where are we now? The free play. Yeah. So in Abhinavagupta, the infinite awakes the infinite, leading to a peaceful, non-dual identification. This can fruitfully be related to the Taittiriya Upanishad's originary reference to rasa. And now there's another, I don't want to go there, it's more complicated. Heidegger's discussion of the existential experience of angst, which is also a kind of fear. Heidegger is saying that there is an underlying kind of angst, anxiety that we feel in the world, because all our experiences are constructed experiences. Just like we are talking about codes, even the codes that we are talking about for aesthetics, if I begin believing that I'm trapped within a world of codes, at some point I'm going to start feeling anxiety. That what is outside of this? Is there a vacuum outside this? So he's saying, however, if we know how to embrace that, we go beyond that, you see. So in a sense, if we look at this entire rasa structure as something, I mean, so Abhinavagupta is giving us a kind of two levels. One is the level of the sarid that is trained. And he may be trained just in these codes. But the other is this chamatkara experience that takes us beyond codes into something which is free of any constructed idea, you see. So that is something that can be thought about. The universalization experienced in Sadharanikarana may be thought of as a universalized sense, what Latin philosophers called a sensus communis, or universal understanding. So sensus communis, from which comes the word common sense. Common sense means, sense here means understanding, meaning. We have a common understanding of this world. You know, when I look at that bag, I have an understanding that it's a bag, right? That we can open it, put things in, close it, etc. We all have that understanding. That's our common sense of that bag. It's a sensus communis. But sensus communis is also constructed. See? So, however, here, Sadharanikarana is not a sensus communis. It's not a common sense. It's a common affect. It's a way to feel something which we can share. And that's what Abhinavagupta is saying. He's saying Sadharanikarana, it does not belong to one person. It belongs to everybody who's experiencing it. So the affective understanding and affectus communis, a power to come to non-dual understanding through sensation and emotion. So anyway, that's one interesting aspect of this. This can create an ethos. I'll come to that in a moment. Critical comments. Any classification of emotions is a selection that is tied to the concerns of a time and a space and the society which uses it. It cannot be considered eternal. Rather, it provides a model for practical classifications of use by a milieu in its own space and time. In other words, as we saw historiographically, don't think of the 9 rasas as something eternal or standard or anything. Don't think of the Ashtanayakas as being standard. Your own time will provide you the necessities for your own classifications. Second, the notion of rasa developed for theater by Bharata retains a sense of elitism and trained connoisseurship. We saw that throughout. It's all for courts, trained connoisseurship. Even when it goes to the popular sphere of the person going to the temple or the person looking at a painting or something like a potter or something like that, there is a training involved, a trained connoisseurship, which are the foundations for social class consciousness. Rasa's primary meaning is taste, a term that connotes a sensibility trained through conventions. See, that's why we talk about taste, whether in East or West. A person who has taste means a person who is elite, who is educated, who is told what is good and what is bad. Abhinavagupta's analysis of rasa goes beyond this. So, but on the one hand, we have to recognize that rasa theory is really, to a large extent, a class construct. But Abhinavagupta's theory goes beyond this to an affective hermeneutics of non-dual experience. So that's where the Sadharanikarana It's affective hermeneutics. Hermeneutics means understanding things, interpreting things through the feeling, rising to a universal sense of feeling. So he's telling us that you can go beyond these conventional trainings to experience something purer. But he does not clearly differentiate the Rasika as an elite connoisseur from a common person seeking universality in experience. The object of art as rasa experience based on a given scheme such as the Natya Shastra and its derived conventions was not shared by later Mughal art or the European naturalism after India was colonized, leading to a crisis of Indian art. During the nationalist period, art historians and philosophers of art such as Havel, Kumaraswamy, Sister Nivedita, after whom this place is named, and Stella Kramrisch tried to revive rasa aesthetics. However, from the late 19th century, modernism as an international phenomenon challenged all conventional understandings of art, which required a normative understanding of taste. If I have to understand taste as a norm, then that is no longer valid. Nobody is going to really respect that today. Modernism and postmodernism in art questioned classicism. And we can say they questioned classicism in the West. But all this is about creating a classicism of the East. See? Questioned classicism as a mode of maintaining the status quo of power inequalities. It pluralized the conventions of art related to objective of art, related the objective of art to social critique. Here one of art's objectives becomes to illuminate in affective experience the hidden ills of our personal and collective lives and lead towards a society of equal opportunity and creativity. This can be related to the ethics of an affectus communis. See? That is, the objective of art, if I can feel why something is bad, if I'm told, it's global warming is really destroying our world, so you better not do anything that will increase global warming. I'll say, oh yeah, really, it's very bad. I shouldn't do it. And then I'll go ahead and do it. Because something in me is not convinced enough. But if I feel it deeply, and art can do that, it can bring us to a state of universal experience of something which is strong enough that it leaves an impression at the affective level. And that will make me do, at that point it won't make me want to do something, but it'll end up transforming me. See, so that's, in a way, the function of art today has to be related to the problems of today in creating an affectus communis. What, if anything, can classical Rasa-theory teach us here? Firstly, perhaps the overemphasis on rasa as a foundational aesthetic category is misplaced. The aesthetic experience is not referred to in terms of rasa by the general population in India. How many people, if you go to the streets and ask them, are you experiencing rasa? Most people don't even know what that term is. Only people who read books by Kumaraswamy think about rasa. Rather, the term darshana is more commonly prevalent. Darshana refers to the non-dual experience of recognition, similar to what Abhinavagupta indicates through rasa. The spiritual aesthetic experience of a temple visit, for example, is derived through a contemplation of the various forms of the deity in the niches of the outer walls before arriving at the central deity, Vigraha, in the shrine, Garbhagriha, to experience darshana. A person goes to a temple. Nowadays, they don't even look at what is on the walls. But the reason the temple was created was for a visual experience. You went there and did pradakshina. What that meant is you went from niche to niche and looked at what there was. And in looking at that, and that's why I was showing those sculptures, each one is expressing a rasa. You are experiencing a certain aspect of that deity and rising to a universal plane related to that aspect. When you complete the round and go in front of the Garbhagriha, you experience something more integral. That's when the chamatkara takes place. You rise to a sense of non-dual experience. That is called darshana. Darshana, as a term, has a greater longevity in the minds of Indian people, popular people, than the notion of rasa. The spiritual, right. Classification schemes of rasa can prepare an integral affective intuition of this kind. I have already touched on the relative worth of special emotions. That's the idea of a historiography. Each set of emotions is relative to its time, or their classification schemes. History should be treated as a framing vibhava, right? When we're talking about what are the circumstances through which this character comes to us in a play, what are the circumstances that are making that play possible? See, that is the historical fact. We are standing here in time, see? So history is the first vibhava, the framing vibhava. This is how Heidegger, for example, views mood. Heidegger is saying, mood is not something subjective. Our time has a mood. That mood is given to us by the problems of our time. The central problems of our time create the mood that we are experiencing, and we take it to be the color of the water in which we swim. So mood arises from historical ontology. Our space-time provides us with this frame, and our priorities and classifications of rasa should be relevant to this frame. Abhinavagupta's teaching of a collective experience of universality and affectus communis through sadharanikarana, due to the universalization of pre-existent knowledge, is a non-dual approach to knowledge through the cultivation of an artistic intuition. You see? So we are trying to cultivate an artistic intuition, not necessarily cultivate a learning. See, through exposure to different kinds of art, we develop an artistic intuition that will allow us to penetrate what is opaque to us right now. This does not need to be elitist, but a capacity developed through exposure to and critique of diverse experiences. Abhinavagupta's highlighting of Adbhuta Rasa and its power to lead to Chamatkara can be instructive here. Chamatkara is related to the sublime in art. The sublime is an indicator of the horizon of recognizability. It's outside our horizon. It's just at the edge of our experience. You see? That's why it's strange. Adbhuta means it is other than what we can put our hands to. It puts us in contact with otherness. A pluralized, non-conventional approach to reality through art must prioritize Adbhuta as opening the gates to the unknown in the world around us and leading towards a pluralized intuition in affective hermeneutics. So even what is so simple, even that bag, actually is really strange. And a good artist, that's what they do. They show you that that bag is really strange. You know, this is Cézanne used to paint these strange plates. Somebody told him, but this is not round. He said, but that's how I see it. You see? So this is the thing, to enter into other worlds, you need a certain kind of, that's the training. It's not a training in codes. It's a training in intuitive affect. Some examples. History should be treated as a framing vibhava. See this is a famous painting. Sanjay Babu knows this is the lover, actors of Bengal, right? Is this Shringara, Hasya, or Adbhuta Rasa? In colonial national translations of the in colonial national translations, note that this painting is being done by Abanindranath Thakur in the early 20th century. Who is the addressee? The addressee is, again, an elite person. The addressee is a hybrid colonial national subject. See? And in that subject, there is a divide and untranslatability. There is something he's pointing out that neither this side nor that side fully understands. There's something strange. That is the Adbhuta over here, you see. There's something untranslatable. The untranslatable retains the alterity of Adbhuta to challenge easy identifications and pose an interiority that forces transformative dialogue, leading towards an epistemology of affective hermeneutics. Is this Karuna, Vibhatsa, or Adbhuta Rasa? This is the famous Guernica by Pablo Picasso. Treating modern art's function as critique, the horror of war is depicted in a way which refuses to resolve itself into something understandable. We are shocked beyond all comfort, yet raised to a universality which leaves its permanent impression in us as a form of affective knowledge. And finally, something you all are probably very familiar with, Sanatan Dinda. Is this Karuna, Bhayanaka, Vibhatsa, or Adbhuta Rasa? Responding to the RG Kaur rape and murder case of 2024, this Durga image reuses Guernica as a chalchitro. Note the chalchitro. It's that same image. And presents Durga, whose maternal breasts have turned to a lion head of ferocious attack. All her hands wield spears to strike as she stomps on a hideous demon. Yet again, this image, which refuses to resolve to the comfortable, lifts us to a universality which leaves an eternal taste of the horror of human violence and indignity and moves us towards an affectus communis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You could have your seat. You're standing for a long time, please. Yeah. Any question or any comment from anyone? Yeah, please.
Good afternoon. Actually, what I want to ask you is that during this classical period, as we could see that all the representation of various rasas were through both male and female sculpture or figures. But as we entered into this medieval period, we tend to see the representation of Shringara through mostly female figures. Why this is so? Is this specifically about the gaze which were changing with the society?
Yeah, I think in either case it is the male gaze. In either case it is the male gaze, but the female has more agency in the classical period. Because even the courtesan has more agency in the classical period. However, their roles are more constrained. You see, their roles are still constrained. While in the medieval period, it is even more strongly kind of a matter of the male gaze. So, Rasa-theory, I think, is certainly, as it has come to us, is a product of male gaze.
Anyone else? Yeah, please.
Currently, does there lie a lesser area of study of this Rasa theory in the since you said that all these various types of diverse expressions of rasa are mostly have been in the male genre, but also in the Shaktism area, because when we look at the pantheon of Mahavidyas, we see a lot of diverse expressions coming at the same time. Like they are found in both, like Tripura Sundari, the goddess third Mahavidya, is seen in a Veera posture. At the same time, she is in an authoritative posture, at the same time in Shringar Rasa with Kameshwara. So, and I would like to know about.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question. And so this is also part of the way in which Rasa theory moves into different domains. So just like it moves into the domain of temple art, it also moves into the domain of tantra, and you see, when we are talking about classifications, that's why I made that point, that rasa theory should not be treated in terms of 9 rasas or 8 rasas. Whatever domain it enters into, it can create its own classification systems. So what happens with the Mahavidyas or what happens with Tantra generally is that there are 2 major lineages. There is the Shrikula and the Kalikula. And you may actually, anthropologically, you may go back to the fact that, as hunters and food gatherers, we had a different kind of life, in which Shakti was everywhere. You see, like a rock, a stone, a tree, a river. So that is a form of power. And we sacrifice to that power, see? And we try to get that power into ourselves, see? So that was a survival mechanism. We needed strength. We needed power in that sense. So the notion of mother or goddess as a powerful figure, a figure that can go to war for us, or who inside us can go to war, which is how the Chandi begins. That is one lineage. And then, when we became more agrarian people, we settled down, then you have the Shrikula, which is related to the agrarian cycle, to nurture, to a more settled life, a civilized life, you see. So these 2 lineages come together, and you start then creating classifications around that have different, gradations, just like the rasas. So exactly, that is one of the ways in which I wouldn't say rasa theory, I'd say rasa theory itself is a manifestation of a classical impulse, which does this kind of a grading of different types of experiences.
But we also see this area of rasa that is in the Srishti Tattva, as you said that the Kali Kula was more aligned towards the goddess as a in the warrior form. But when we are coming towards the Bengal, we are seeing texts like Mahabhagavat Puran and Mahakal Samhita, where we are also seeing Kali in the role of the creatrix goddess. And
Yes.
so definitely there, alongside the war rasa, I think definitely the Shringar rasa is also coming into
absolutely.
place.
Yes. So yes, there is a lot of crossover, and it's a much more fertile area than looking at rasas through the lens of Bharata can give us.
Yes. Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, sir, I have a small query.
Yes.
I have a series of queries, but just for this session, only a small query that if we consider rasa as a experience or as a kind of a process, from rasonmesha to rasa nishpatti. So, even in today's context, don't you think that this process is on? And doesn't it make rasa relevant even the art experience of the 21st century?
Absolutely. That's why I ended with those examples. The only thing that we have, absolutely, it's on. And I think it's a very valid theory. If you look at it from the possibilities that are not that much explored in Abhinava Gupta's writings, because we get stuck. We get stuck with the 9 rasas, or how the 9th rasa came in, or we get stuck in the Saridaya must be trained. If we take all those things apart, then we find that it's a universal teaching, a universal theory. And that theory is valid today as well, and only we have to see it in terms of today's problems. Yeah.
And maybe this today's session was a small step towards that direction. Thank you so much, sir. So thus we come to the end of this wonderful session. I invite Professor Shoykot Majumdar to kindly give the official vote of thanks. Professor Majumdar is the head of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. I request sir to please take your seat.
First, I would like to thank.
Finally, we'll have a group photo, students, so please.
First, I would like to thank Professor Dr. Debashish Banerji, sir, for his lecture and for his session. Though I personally have missed majority of the session, I suppose it was a very fascinating one and very a huge experience for all the students and also the faculty members present here. I also take this opportunity to thank our Chancellor, Mr. Shottam Rajadhuri sir, for always inspiring us to go a few miles beyond the classroom lectures and do this kind of workshops and all these exercises which always is always necessary for the aspiring students. I also thank Professor Dr. Anupam Basu, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Dhrubajyoti Chattopadhyay, our Pro-Chancellor, sir, and all other departments, especially the admin departments, for arranging all this for this workshop, and the technical members who are doing our students, our journalism and mass communication students who are doing this audio-visual coverage, still photography, everything. And at last, but not the least, I thank all the present, my dear colleagues, the faculty members, and and the dear students for being a very patient but very interactive audience. Thank you so much.